Eleanor Mason stood in front of the mirror, her wedding dress hanging loosely from her shoulders. At 36, the creases around her eyes told stories of a life spent waiting. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. The day she finally found belonging in a new country with a man who had promised her the world through carefully crafted emails. Instead, she found herself alone in a rented room, clutching a crumpled note that simply read, "I expected someone younger. I'm sorry. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3,000 miles from her home in Kyiv, Ukraine, with barely enough money for a week's stay and nowhere to go. Eleanor felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. Little did she know that across town, a man with scars both visible and hidden was about to change the course of her life forever. The small town of Mapleton, nestled in the rolling hills of Virginia, rarely saw newcomers. Its main street consisted of a diner, a hardware store, a church, and not much else. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business before they knew it themselves. So when Eleanor Mason arrived at the Mapleton Inn, with her 2 suitcases and a broken heart, it took less than a day for her story to travel from one end of town to the other. Eleanor had grown up in Ukraine, the daughter of mathematics professors who valued education above all else. By 30, she had earned her doctorate in literature and secured a teaching position at a small university in Kyiv. But as political unrest grew and economic opportunities dwindled, Eleanor watched her friends leave one by one for better prospects abroad. At 35, after her parents passed away within months of each other, Eleanor found herself truly alone for the first time. That's when she joined the international matchmaking service. She wasn't naive. She knew the stereotypes about mail-order brides. But Eleanor wasn't looking for luxury or an escape. She wanted companionship, perhaps children before it was too late, and the chance to share her love of literature with students. In America, after months of correspondence with Bradley Wells, a 42-year-old high school principal from Virginia who shared her passion for classic literature, she believed she had found exactly that. Their emails had been thoughtful and deep. They discussed Tolstoy and Hemingway, shared their dreams of a small house with bookshelves in every room, and the possibility of adopting children. Bradley's photos showed a kind-faced man with salt and pepper hair and glasses. Not traditionally handsome, but his eyes seemed honest, and his words even more so. "I don't care about finding someone young and beautiful," he had written. "I want a partner with depth, someone who understands that life's greatest stories aren't found in perfect beginnings, but in the beautiful complications that follow." When he proposed via video call, showing her a simple sapphire ring that had belonged to his grandmother, Eleanor accepted with tears in her eyes. They made arrangements. She would come to America on a fiancé visa. They would marry within the 90-day requirement and begin their life together. The journey had been exhausting. 20 hours of travel, a missed connection in Frankfurt, and the anxiety of immigration questioning. But when she finally emerged from the airport terminal in Richmond, the disappointment on Bradley's face was impossible to miss. "Eleanor?" he had asked, though they had video-called many times. His eyes scanned her face, lingering on the fine lines around her eyes, the strands of grey she hadn't bothered to colour before the trip. The next 3 days had been increasingly uncomfortable. Bradley grew distant, making excuses to spend time away from the small rental he had secured for them until the wedding. When Eleanor asked if something was wrong, he assured her it was just pre-wedding nerves. The morning of the wedding, Eleanor woke early to prepare. She had just finished her makeup when she heard the front door close. On the kitchen table, she found the note, her engagement ring, and $500 in cash. Now, sitting on the bed in her rented room at the Mapleton Inn, Eleanor tried to make sense of what had happened. The wedding venue had been paid for, as had the minister and the small reception at the local community centre. But Bradley had called and cancelled everything that morning, telling them only that circumstances had changed. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. "Housekeeping," called a voice. "Not today, please," Eleanor answered, her Ukrainian accent thicker through her tears. "Actually, it's Martha Jenkins, the innkeeper. May I come in? I've brought some tea." Eleanor hesitated, then crossed the room and opened the door. Martha Jenkins was a plump woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled into a practical bun. She carried a tray with a teapot, 2 cups, and a plate of cookies. "I heard what happened," Martha said simply. "News travels fast here." Eleanor stepped aside to let her in, embarrassment burning her cheeks. "I will be checking out tomorrow. I need to figure out what to do." Martha set the tray down on the small table by the window. "Where will you go?" Eleanor shook her head. "I don't know. Back to Ukraine, I suppose, though I sold everything to come here." She hadn't told her friends about Bradley, too embarrassed by what they might think of her decision. There was nothing and no one to go back to. "Well, there's no need to decide tonight," Martha said firmly. "The tea is on the house, and so is your room for the next week." Eleanor began to protest, but Martha waved her off. "I've been where you are, dear. Not exactly the same, mind you, but I know what it's like when the future you counted on disappears in an instant." That evening, Martha introduced Eleanor to her son, Michael Jenkins, who ran the local Veterans Centre. A former Marine in his early 40s, Michael had the steady presence of someone who had seen the worst the world had to offer and survived it. The scar that ran from his left temple down to his jaw told part of that story. But it was the quiet watchfulness in his green eyes that hinted at deeper wounds. "Mom said you might need some help figuring out your options," he said simply, extending a hand to Eleanor. Despite her embarrassment, Eleanor found herself sharing the whole story with Michael as they sat in the inn's empty dining room after hours. He listened without interruption, his face betraying no judgment. "Bradley Wells," Michael said when she had finished. "The high school principal." It wasn't a question. Eleanor nodded. "You know him?" "Mapleton's a small town. Everyone knows everyone." He hesitated. "I'm sorry this happened to you." "It's my fault," Eleanor said quietly. "I should have known better." Michael's expression hardened slightly. "No, it's not your fault that he lied and manipulated you." "He didn't exactly lie," Eleanor corrected. "He just changed his mind when he saw me in person." "You said you video called?" "Yes, many times." Michael shook his head. "Then he knew exactly what you looked like. This wasn't about your appearance, Eleanor. Men like Bradley, they like the idea of rescuing someone, of having someone indebted to them. When they realize you're a whole person with your own thoughts and needs, they panic." The insight surprised her. "How do you know that?" A small, sad smile crossed his face. "I work with veterans all day. I've seen every kind of human behavior, good and bad, and I've seen men like Bradley before." Over the next few days, Michael helped Eleanor explore her options. The fiancé visa complicated things. Without marrying a US citizen, she would have to return to Ukraine within 90 days. She could apply for jobs that might sponsor a work visa, but those were difficult to secure, especially on short notice. "I do have my doctorate in literature," she told Michael as they sat at the local diner. "And I speak 4 languages. Perhaps a university?" "That's definitely worth exploring," Michael agreed. "There's Westfield College about 40 minutes from here. It's small, but they have a good reputation." Eleanor nodded, making a note in the small book where she'd been tracking her dwindling resources. The $500 Bradley had left wouldn't last long, despite Martha's generosity with the room. "I could also see if any of the veterans' families need a tutor," Michael suggested. "Many of them struggle with school after their parents deploy or return with injuries." "I would like that," Eleanor said sincerely. I love teaching. As the days passed, Eleanor began to see a different side of Mapleton. The initial whispers and stares gave way to small kindnesses. Mrs. Henderson at the diner slipped extra toast onto her plate each morning. The librarian, Mr. Sullivan, offered her a temporary library card without the usual proof of residence. And Martha introduced her to the women's group at the local church, who welcomed her without questions. Michael, too, became a steady presence. He would stop by the inn after work, sometimes with information about job opportunities, other times simply to see how she was doing. Unlike Bradley's wordy emails, filled with literary references and grand promises, Michael's communication was straightforward, his actions matching his words. 1 week after her arrival, Eleanor received an unexpected phone call from Westfield College. They had an emergency opening for someone to teach an intensive summer course in comparative literature after their professor had a medical emergency. Dr. Petrov mentioned you might be available, the department chair explained. Eleanor was stunned. Dr. Petrov, Alexander Petrov. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Yes, he's our visiting professor from the University of Moscow. Do you know him? He was my mentor in Kiev years ago, Eleanor said, amazed at the coincidence. I had no idea he was in the United States. That evening, Eleanor shared the news with Michael over dinner at the local Italian restaurant. Her treat, she had insisted. To thank him for his help. That's wonderful, Michael said sincerely. Will it help with your visa situation? Eleanor's smile faltered. Not really. It's only an 8-week position. They can pay me as a contractor, but it won't qualify me for a work visa. Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. At least it buys you some time to figure things out. As they walked back to the inn, under a sky filled with stars, Eleanor felt a strange contentment despite her uncertain future. I never got to see stars like this in Kiev, she said. Too much light pollution. Michael looked up. The stars were what I missed most in Afghanistan. On clear nights in the desert, the sky looked close enough to touch. It was the first time he had mentioned his service. Eleanor didn't press, but she felt honored by this small glimpse into his past. The following day, Eleanor met with Alexander Petrov, now grey-haired but still possessing the sharp intelligence she remembered. After catching up on the years since, they had last seen each other. He asked about her situation. Michael Jenkins told me some of what happened, he admitted. I hope you don't mind. No, Eleanor said. It seems everyone knows everyone's business here. Small towns, Alexander agreed with a smile. But sometimes that works in your favor. The college is very interested in you for a permanent position that will open in the fall. If they offer it to you, they could sponsor your visa. Hope blossomed in Eleanor's chest. That would be wonderful. There's just one small problem, Alexander continued. The committee won't make a decision until late August, which is after your fiancé visa expires. Eleanor's hope deflated. I see. There might be another solution, Alexander said carefully. Though I hesitate to suggest it. Please, any option is worth considering at this point. Marriage, he said simply, not a fake one. That would be illegal. But perhaps someone willing to marry you sooner rather than later, with the understanding that you're still getting to know each other. Eleanor shook her head immediately. I couldn't ask anyone to do that. I'm not suggesting you ask, Alexander clarified. I'm merely pointing out that it's an option if the right situation presents itself. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The idea Alexander had planted took root in her mind, but she pushed it away. She wouldn't use someone else to solve her problems. She had her pride, even if she had little else. She was startled by a knock at her door just after midnight. Cautiously she approached. Eleanor, it's Michael. I'm sorry it's so late, but I need to talk to you. She opened the door to find him standing there, his face pale in the dim hallway light. "What's wrong?" she asked, alarmed. "Nothing's wrong," he said quickly, "but I heard from my friend at immigration today. There's a problem with your paperwork. The visa clock started ticking the moment you entered the country, not when you were supposed to get married. You have fewer days than we thought." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "How many?" 17. She sank onto the edge of the bed. 17 days to find a solution or go back to nothing. Michael sat beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "I have an idea, but I don't want you to feel pressured or think I'm taking advantage of your situation." Eleanor looked at him, this man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect since the moment they met. "What's your idea?" "Marry me," he said, his voice steady despite the enormity of the proposal. "Not as a favor or a transaction. I admire you, Eleanor, your strength, your intelligence, your dignity in the face of everything that's happened. In a different situation, I would have asked you to dinner and gotten to know you properly. But we don't have that luxury of time." Eleanor stared at him, searching his face for any sign of pity or deceit. She found neither. "Why would you do this?" Michael's gaze was direct. "Because I've spent the last 10 years helping others rebuild their lives after trauma. I know what it looks like when someone deserves a second chance." He hesitated. "And because when I look at you, I see someone I could build a life with if you gave me the chance to prove it." Eleanor couldn't speak for a long moment. "This is crazy," she finally said. "Maybe," Michael agreed, "but I've learned that sometimes the craziest decisions are the ones that save us." "What if it doesn't work out? What if you regret it?" "Then we'll deal with that honestly, like adults, but we'll cross that bridge if we come to it." Eleanor thought of Bradley's beautiful words that had proven so empty, then of Michael's simple actions that had spoken volumes. She thought of the way he listened when she spoke, how he respected her independence while offering support. She thought of the scar on his face and the shadows in his eyes that spoke of a man who understood both pain and resilience. "I need time to think," she said finally. Michael nodded, standing to leave. "Of course, it's a big decision, just don't take all 17 days. As he reached the door, Eleanor called after him, "Michael, thank you for seeing me as I am, not as someone to be rescued." His smile was gentle. "That's the thing about rescue, Eleanor. When it's real, it goes both ways." After he left, Eleanor stood at the window of her room, looking out at the sleeping town of Mapleton. She had come to America seeking one thing and found something entirely different. The future stretched before her, uncertain but suddenly full of possibilities she hadn't dared to imagine. 17 days to decide, 17 days to choose between the familiar emptiness of her old life and the frightening potential of a new one, with a battle-scarred veteran who had offered her his name, his protection, and perhaps someday his heart. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the thin curtains of Eleanor's room at the Mapleton Inn. She had barely slept, her mind racing with the implications of Michael's unexpected proposal. The rational part of her brain listed all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Marrying a man she'd known for only a week, the potential legal complications, the judgment from others who would assume she was using him for citizenship. But another part of her, the part that had survived the humiliation of Bradley's rejection and the terror of finding herself alone in a foreign country, recognized something genuine in Michael's offer. Unlike Bradley, who had hidden his true character behind flowery emails, Michael had been forthright from the beginning. She dressed carefully in a simple blue dress and made her way downstairs to the inn's dining room. Martha was already there, setting out breakfast for the handful of other guests. "You look like you haven't slept a wink," Martha observed, pouring Eleanor a cup of strong coffee. "Is it that obvious?" Eleanor asked, gratefully accepting the mug. Martha's knowing smile reminded Eleanor that this woman had raised Michael and had shaped him into the man he was. My son came home late last night, looking just as sleepless. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. He told you? Not in so many words, but a mother knows. Martha sat down across from Eleanor. He's never been impulsive, not even as a child. When Michael commits to something, he means it. That's what scares me, Eleanor admitted. I don't want him to regret this act of kindness. Martha studied her for a moment. Is that what you think it is? Kindness? Before Eleanor could answer, the bell above the inn's door jingled, and Michael walked in. He looked as tired as Eleanor felt, but his smile when he saw her was warm and genuine. "Good morning," he said, nodding to his mother before turning his attention to Eleanor. "I was hoping we could talk, maybe take a walk around town." Eleanor nodded, suddenly nervous. "I'd like that." They strolled down Mapleton's main street in comfortable silence. The morning was warm, promising a hot day ahead. When they reached the small town square with its gazebo and ancient oak trees, Michael gestured to a bench. "I want to be clear about something," he said as they sat down. "What I proposed last night, it's not just about solving your visa problem." Eleanor looked at him, taking in the serious set of his jaw, the way the morning light illuminated the scar that ran down his face. "Then what is it about?" Michael took a deep breath. "When I came back from Afghanistan 8 years ago, I was in a dark place. The physical injuries healed, but the rest—" He touched his scarred face unconsciously. "I shut myself off from the possibility of a real connection with anyone. It was easier that way." Eleanor listened, sensing how difficult this was for him to share. Working with other veterans helped. Giving them purpose gave me purpose. But I still kept everyone at arm's length. He turned to face her fully. "Then you arrived in town, and something changed. I saw someone who, despite everything, still had courage and dignity. It made me want to be brave too." "Brave enough to marry a stranger?" Eleanor asked softly. Michael's laugh was gentle. "Brave enough to admit that I don't want to be alone anymore. Maybe we could build something real given time." His eyes met hers. "I'm not proposing a transaction, Eleanor. I'm proposing a beginning." Eleanor felt something shift inside her, fear giving way to a tentative hope. "I need to be honest with you too. I came to America because I wanted a new life, yes, but also because I was lonely. My parents are gone, my friends scattered. I thought Bradley was offering companionship, a family." "And what do you want now?" Michael asked. "Now?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. "I want to stand on my own 2 feet. I want to teach again. And maybe—" she hesitated. "Maybe I want the chance to know you better, without the pressure of this deadline hanging over us." Michael nodded. "That's fair, but the deadline is real. So here's what I propose. We get married, legally, officially, to solve the immediate problem. But we take our time with the rest. You'll have your own space, your own independence. We'll date like normal people, get to know each other properly. And if it doesn't work out," Eleanor had to ask, "then we'll face that honestly. I won't hold you to anything you don't want." His expression was solemn. "I just ask that you give us a real chance." Eleanor thought about it, weighing the risks against the glimpse of possibility she saw in Michael's steady gaze. "Okay," she said finally. "Yes." The surprise on his face was quickly replaced by a smile that transformed his features. "Yes." "Yes," Eleanor confirmed, her own smile breaking through. "But I have conditions. I pay my own way as much as possible. I keep teaching. And no lies, not to each other, not to anyone else about what this is." "Agreed," Michael said immediately. "No lies." They spent the next hour discussing practical matters, where Eleanor would live. Michael had a small house with a guest room that could be hers. What they would tell people, the truth that they were taking things slowly but committed to giving their relationship a real chance. And when they would marry, soon, given the visa deadline. As they walked back toward the inn, they passed Bradley. Wells coming out of the hardware store. Eleanor felt Michael tense beside her, but she placed a gentle hand on his arm. Bradley froze when he saw them, his face flushing with shame. "Eleanor, Hello, Bradley," she said calmly, surprising herself with the absence of bitterness she felt. "I trust you're well." "I'm so sorry," he stammered. "I know what I did was unforgivable." "Yes, it was," Eleanor agreed, her voice level. "But sometimes life has a way of working out for the best. Goodbye, Bradley." She walked on, conscious of Michael's quiet presence beside her and the strengthening conviction that she was making the right choice. The wedding took place 10 days later in Martha's garden behind the inn. It was a simple affair. No white dress or elaborate decorations, just wild roses climbing over an arbor, a few close friends, and a justice of the peace. Eleanor wore a pale blue sundress she had found at the local boutique, and Michael wore a crisp white shirt and dark slacks. "You don't have to do this," Michael told her one last time before the ceremony began. "We could find another way." Eleanor shook her head. "I want to," she said, realizing as she spoke that it was true. In less than 2 weeks, this man, with his quiet strength and straightforward kindness, had become more important to her than she could have imagined. The ceremony was brief, their vows traditional, with one addition. "I promise to be honest, to respect your independence, and to give this beginning my best effort," Michael said, his voice steady as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. When Eleanor repeated the same words, adding them to the traditional vows, she was surprised by the emotion that tightened her throat. This wasn't how she had imagined her wedding day, but there was something pure about the honesty of their arrangement that touched her deeply. After the small reception, Michael drove Eleanor to his home, now their home, on the outskirts of town. The house was modest but charming, a one-story craftsman with a wide front porch and tall windows that let in plenty of light. "It belonged to my grandparents," Michael explained as he carried her suitcases inside. "I renovated it myself after I came back from Afghanistan. It helped to have a project to focus on." Eleanor followed him through the living room, with its comfortable furniture and walls lined with bookshelves, to a hallway that led to 3 bedrooms. The largest was clearly Michael's. Next to it was a smaller room that had been set up as a home office. "This one's yours," Michael said, opening the door to the 3rd bedroom. "I hope it's okay. My mom helped make it up for you." Eleanor stepped inside, touched by the care that had gone into preparing the space. The walls were a soft sage green, the bed covered with a handmade quilt. Fresh flowers sat on the dresser, and a small writing desk was positioned beneath the window that overlooked a garden. "It's perfect," she said sincerely. "Thank you." That night they shared a simple dinner that Michael had prepared: grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and a bottle of wine to toast their new beginning. The conversation flowed easily as they discussed books they loved, places they'd visited, and their hopes for the future. "I've been thinking about the fall semester at Westfield," Eleanor said as they cleared the dishes together. "If they offer me the permanent position, I'd like to accept it." "I think that's a great idea," Michael said. "It's about a 40-minute drive from here, not too bad. I'll need to get my driver's license," Eleanor mused, "and a car eventually." "We'll figure it out," Michael assured her, "one step at a time." Later, as they prepared to go to their separate rooms for the night, Michael paused in the hallway. "I meant what I said, Eleanor. This is real for me. I know the circumstances are unusual, but I want us to have a chance." Eleanor looked at this man who was now her husband, taking in the sincerity in his eyes, the quiet strength in his stance. "It's real for me too," she admitted. I'm grateful, but it's more than that. I want to see where this leads. The summer passed in a blur of adjustments and discoveries. Eleanor started teaching at Westfield College, throwing herself into the intensive literature course with enthusiasm. The students responded well to her, and by mid-July, the department chair had all but confirmed that the permanent position would be hers come fall. At home, she and Michael settled into a comfortable routine. They shared meals, watched movies, together in the evenings, and slowly learned each other's habits and preferences. True to his word, Michael respected her space and independence, never pressuring her for more than she was ready to give. They began dating in earnest, dinner at restaurants in nearby towns, picnics by the lake, even a weekend trip to Washington, D.C. to visit the museums. With each outing, Eleanor felt the connection between them deepening, built on mutual respect and growing affection. One evening in late July, they sat on the front porch watching a summer storm roll in, the air heavy with electricity. Eleanor had received the official offer from Westfield that morning, a tenure track position, starting in September. "We should celebrate," Michael said, clearly pleased by her news. "We should," Eleanor agreed. "But first, there's something I need to say." Michael turned to her, his expression open but curious. "When we got married, it was for practical reasons," Eleanor began carefully. "But these past weeks, they've changed things for me." "For me too," Michael said quietly. Eleanor took a deep breath. "I want us to be a real couple, Michael. Not just roommates or friends. I want this marriage to be real in every way." The joy that bloomed across his face was answer enough, but his words confirmed it. "I've been waiting for you to be ready. I didn't want to rush you." "Always so considerate," Eleanor teased gently, moving closer to him on the porch swing. When he kissed her, it felt like the culmination of everything they had been building toward: trust, respect, and a love that had grown naturally from the most unexpected beginning. Life settled into a new pattern after that. Eleanor began the fall semester at Westfield as Dr. Eleanor Jenkins, her married name now legal on all her documentation. She flourished in the academic environment, quickly becoming a favorite among students for her engaging teaching style and genuine interest in their development. Michael continued his work at the Veterans Center, but Eleanor noticed subtle changes in him. The shadows in his eyes appeared less frequently, and he spoke more openly about his experiences in Afghanistan. One night, he showed her the medals he kept in a box in his closet: a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, tangible reminders of his service and sacrifice. "I never felt I deserved these," he admitted, as Eleanor traced the engravings with her fingertips. "Not when so many others didn't come home at all." "Survivor's guilt," Eleanor said softly. "I understand it in my own way. Why did I get to leave Ukraine when so many couldn't? Why do I get this second chance when others don't?" Michael nodded, recognizing the parallel. "Maybe we honor them by making the most of the chances we've been given." In October, just as the Virginia hills exploded with autumn color, Martha Jenkins suffered a mild heart attack. The doctors assured them it wasn't severe, but it was a wake-up call. As they sat in the hospital waiting room during her recovery, Michael confessed one of his deepest fears. "I thought I was going to lose her, just like that," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And all I could think was how many people I've already lost. Friends in combat, my father when I was 17. I don't know if I can bear any more loss." Eleanor took his hand, understanding suddenly the source of his initial hesitation to connect deeply with others. "Loss is part of loving," she said gently, "but it doesn't mean we shouldn't love. The alternative is to be alone, and that's its own kind of loss." Michael looked at her, his expression vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "When did you get so wise?" Eleanor smiled. "I had a good teacher, a certain battle-scarred veteran, who taught me to be brave enough to begin again." Martha recovered fully, And as Thanksgiving approached, she insisted on hosting the holiday at the inn for what she called her growing family. The dinner included not only Michael and Eleanor, but also several of the veterans Michael worked with who had nowhere else to go. Alexander Petrov and his wife from Westfield College, and even Mrs. Henderson from the diner. As Eleanor looked around the table at these people who had become her community in just a few short months, she felt a profound sense of belonging. When Michael squeezed her hand beneath the table, she knew he felt it too, the miracle of finding home in the most unexpected circumstances. That night, as they lay together in what had long since become their shared bedroom, Eleanor propped herself up on one elbow to look at her husband's face in the moonlight. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if Bradley hadn't left me at the altar?" she asked. Michael considered the question seriously. "I try not to think about that alternative too much, but I do know that sometimes the most painful rejections lead us exactly where we're meant to be." Eleanor traced the scar on his face with gentle fingers. "All our scars, visible and invisible, they're part of our story now." "A story I wouldn't change," Michael said, pulling her close. "Not any part of it." As winter settled over Mapleton, bringing with it short days and long, cozy evenings by the fireplace, Eleanor received a letter from Ukraine. It was from an old colleague, sharing news of the university where she had once taught and asking if she was happy in her new life. Eleanor sat at her desk to compose a reply, her gaze drifting occasionally to the window where she could see Michael clearing snow from the driveway. She thought about how to explain the journey that had brought her here, from mail-order bride to abandoned fiancé to finding love with a man whose own scars matched the invisible ones she carried. In the end, she wrote simply, "I came to America, looking for security, but found something far more precious, a place where I belong completely, just as I am." Sometimes the happiest endings come from the most painful beginnings. Sometimes being left at the altar leads you directly to where your heart was always meant to be. Spring arrived in Mapleton with an explosion of dogwood blossoms and the sweet scent of honeysuckle. Eleanor and Michael celebrated their first anniversary, not on the day of their legal wedding, but on the day they had first met at the Mapleton Inn, a choice that reflected their unique journey from strangers to true partners. Their celebration was simple: dinner at the inn prepared by Martha, followed by a moonlit walk around the town square where Michael had first proposed his unconventional arrangement. As they sat on the same bench where they had talked that morning, Eleanor marveled at how much had changed in a year. "I was so terrified then," she admitted, leaning against Michael's shoulder. "Alone in a foreign country, no real plan, no one to turn to." Michael wrapped an arm around her. "And now? Now I can't imagine being anywhere else, with anyone else." She turned to look at him, taking in the familiar contours of his face, the scar that she no longer truly saw, except as a part of the man she loved. "You saved me, you know." "No," Michael said firmly. "You saved yourself. I just happened to be there to witness it." The following week brought an unexpected visitor to their door. Eleanor was grading papers at her desk when she heard the knock. Opening the door, she found herself face to face with a woman she had never seen before, tall, blonde and elegantly dressed. "Can I help you?" Eleanor asked, noting the expensive car parked in their driveway. "I'm looking for Michael Jenkins," the woman said, her voice carrying the polished accent of old money. "I was told this is his address." "It is," Eleanor confirmed. "I'm his wife, Eleanor. He's not home right now. He's at the Veterans Center until 5. Can I help you with something?" The woman's eyebrows rose slightly at the word wife, but she quickly composed her features. "I'm Diane Harrison. Michael and we were engaged several years ago." Eleanor felt a moment of surprise. Michael had never mentioned a fiancé, but She recovered quickly. "Would you like to come in, Diane? I can call Michael if it's urgent." "No," Diane said after a moment's hesitation. "No, I think I'd like to talk to you first, if that's all right." Over tea in the living room, Diane explained that she and Michael had been high school sweethearts who had reconnected after college. They were engaged when he deployed to Afghanistan. When he returned with his injuries, both physical and psychological, he had broken off their engagement. "He said he wasn't the same person anymore, that he couldn't offer me what I deserved," Diane explained, turning her teacup in elegant hands. "I didn't understand then. I thought he was pushing me away because of his scars, because he thought I couldn't handle how he looked." Eleanor listened carefully, sensing there was more to the story. "I got married a few years later," Diane continued. "It ended badly. My husband wasn't who I thought he was." A rueful smile crossed her face. "I've been thinking about Michael a lot since my divorce. When I heard he had gotten married, I had to see for myself." "Why?" Eleanor asked gently. Diane met her eyes directly. "To see if he had finally found someone who could reach the part of him that shut down after he came back from war. The part I couldn't reach, no matter how hard I tried." Before Eleanor could respond, the front door opened and Michael walked in. He stopped abruptly when he saw their visitor, shock registering on his face. "Diane," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." "Hello, Michael." Diane stood, suddenly seeming less confident. "I hope you don't mind my dropping. But like this, your wife has been kind enough to keep me company." Michael's eyes went to Eleanor, a silent question in them. She gave him a reassuring smile. "Diane was just telling me about how you two knew each other," Eleanor explained. "I made tea. Would you like some?" The three of them sat in the living room, the conversation awkward at first but gradually easing as Michael relaxed. It became clear to Eleanor that whatever had been between Michael and Diane was truly in the past. But she also understood something else. This encounter was giving Michael a chance to see how far he had come. When Diane finally rose to leave, she paused at the door. "I'm glad, Michael," she said simply. "Glad that you found what you needed." Her eyes shifted to Eleanor. "Both of you." After she had gone, Michael was quiet, staring out the window as Diane's car disappeared down the driveway. "Why didn't you ever mention her?" Eleanor asked, not accusingly but curious. Michael sighed. "It wasn't my finest moment. After I came back, I was lost. The physical injuries were obvious, but the rest—" He touched his temple. "I couldn't let anyone close, not even someone who had loved me before. You shut her out. Completely." His admission was heavy with old regret. "I told myself it was for her own good, that she deserved someone whole, but the truth was, I couldn't bear to be vulnerable, to need someone when I wasn't sure I would ever be myself again." Eleanor moved closer, taking his hand. "And now," Michael's smile was tinged with wonder, "now I know that being whole doesn't mean being unbroken. It means finding someone who sees your broken pieces and loves you anyway." Summer brought a new challenge. Eleanor received a phone call from Alexander Petrov with surprising news. Her former university in Kiev was offering her a prestigious visiting professorship for the upcoming academic year. It would be a significant boost to her career, a chance to reconnect with her homeland, and an opportunity that was difficult to refuse. "You should accept it," Michael said without hesitation when she told him. "This is exactly the kind of recognition you deserve." "But it would mean leaving for nearly a year," Eleanor pointed out. "I'd have to take a leave of absence from Westfield. We'd be apart for months." Michael took her hands in his. "Eleanor, when we got married, one of your conditions was that you would keep teaching, keep your independence. I meant it when I agreed. And to that was before," Eleanor began. "Before we fell in love," Michael finished for her. "That doesn't change the promise I made. Your career matters. Your dreams matter. Over the next few weeks, they discussed the logistics. Eleanor could spend the fall semester in Kiev, return to Virginia for the winter break, then go back for the spring term. It wasn't ideal, but they could make it work with video calls and the occasional visit. "I'm proud of you," Michael told her the night before her departure. "I want you to know that." Eleanor looked around their bedroom, memorizing the details. The bookshelf with their mingled collections, the quilt Martha had made for them as a wedding gift, the photograph of the two of them at Westfield's faculty dinner. "I'm going to miss you." Michael pulled her close. "This will always be your home, Eleanor. I will always be here waiting for you." The months of separation were harder than either of them had anticipated. Despite daily video calls and constant text messages, the distance took its toll. Eleanor threw herself into her work in Kiev, rediscovering parts of herself that had been set aside in the whirlwind of her new life in America. Michael kept busy with the Veterans Center and a house renovation project he had started. When Eleanor returned for winter break, their reunion was sweet, but also revealed the subtle ways they had each changed during their time apart. There were moments of disconnection, small misunderstandings that hadn't existed before. "We're out of sync," Eleanor observed one night as they prepared dinner together, bumping into each other in the kitchen that had once been a space of easy coordination. "We just need time to find our rhythm again," Michael assured her. But she heard the worry beneath his confidence. The 3 weeks of winter break flew by, and all too soon Eleanor was preparing to return to Kiev for the spring semester. The night before her departure, they sat before the fireplace, the weight of their impending separation hanging heavy between them. "I've been thinking," Michael said suddenly. "What if I came with you?" Eleanor stared at him. "To Kiev? But what about the Veterans Center? Your work here?" "I've been training Jason to take over more responsibilities anyway," Michael said, referring to his assistant director. "And I could use some of my accumulated leave, not for the whole semester, but maybe a month or two." Hope bloomed in Eleanor's chest. "You would do that?" "Eleanor," Michael said seriously, "when I realized I was dreading tomorrow more than I've dreaded anything since coming home from Afghanistan, I knew something had to change. We found each other against all odds. I'm not willing to let distance threaten what we've built." She kissed him then, feeling the certainty of his love like an anchor in a life that had once been defined by instability and loss. Michael arrived in Kiev 2 weeks after Eleanor's return. Watching him navigate the city that had once been her home, seeing her culture through his eyes, brought Eleanor a joy she hadn't anticipated. They explored together the golden-domed cathedrals, the cobblestone streets of the old town, the bustling markets where Michael gamely tried every unfamiliar food Eleanor suggested. He attended some of her lectures, sitting proudly in the back row as she captivated her students with her insights on comparative literature. In turn, she accompanied him to meetings with Ukrainian veterans organizations, where his expertise and compassion transcended language barriers. "You're different here," Michael observed one evening as they walked along the Dnieper River. "More confident, more yourself." Eleanor considered this. "I think I needed to come back to remember who I was before everything changed. Before I became the woman who was left at the altar, the foreigner trying to build a new life." "And who are you now?" Michael asked, genuinely curious. Eleanor smiled. "I'm still figuring that out, but I know one thing for certain. Whoever I am, whatever I become, I want to share it with you." The spring semester ended with an offer Eleanor hadn't expected. A permanent split position that would allow her to teach at Westfield for fall semesters and at Kiev University during spring terms. It was an unusual arrangement, but one that recognized her unique qualifications and connections to both institutions. "What do you think?" she asked Michael as they packed their apartment in Kiev, preparing to return to Virginia. "Could we make it work?" Splitting our time between two continents? Michael was quiet for a moment, considering. It would be complicated, he admitted. But if this past year has taught me anything, it's that home isn't a place, it's where we're together. By their second anniversary, they had established a new rhythm: fall in Virginia, spring in Kiev, summers divided between the two. Michael arranged his work at the Veterans Center to accommodate their schedule, eventually establishing a partnership with Ukrainian organizations that gave his own career an international dimension. It wasn't always easy. There were visa complications, housing issues, and the challenge of maintaining two households. But each difficulty they overcame strengthened their bond, reminding them of how their relationship had begun, with practical problems that had ultimately led to profound connection. On a crisp October evening, they sat on their front porch in Virginia, enjoying the last warm days before winter. Eleanor had news. Westfield College was publishing a collection of her essays on cross-cultural literature, a professional milestone she had long dreamed of achieving. "We should celebrate," Michael said, his enthusiasm for her accomplishments as strong as ever. "Dinner at that new place in Richmond?" "Actually," Eleanor said, a smile playing at her lips, "I had something else in mind." She handed him a small box tied with a ribbon. Inside was a children's book, Goodnight Moon, with a note tucked into the first page: "For the baby who will join our journey in about 7 months." Michael stared at the book, then at Eleanor, comprehension dawning slowly on his face. "You're pregnant?" Eleanor nodded, suddenly nervous. They had discussed children, in abstract terms, but had never actively tried, both of them content with their unconventional life together. "Are you happy about this?" she asked hesitantly. Michael's response was to pull her into an embrace so fierce it answered her question completely. When he finally released her, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Eleanor, you have given me more than I ever thought possible, a life I never dared to imagine, and now this—" He placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "This is everything." Their daughter, Sophia Martha Jenkins, was born the following spring in Kiev, where Eleanor's colleagues threw an elaborate baby shower combining American and Ukrainian traditions. Martha flew over for the birth, bringing with her a handmade quilt that incorporated fabrics from both cultures, a tangible symbol of the blended life Sophia would inherit. When Sophia was 6 weeks old, they brought her home to Virginia for the summer. As Michael carried the sleeping infant up the walkway to their house, Eleanor was struck by how far they had come from that first meeting at the Mapleton Inn. "What are you thinking?" Michael asked, noticing her expression. "I was just remembering how we started," Eleanor said softly. "How close I came to leaving America, to never knowing you or this life we've built." Michael looked down at their daughter, then back at Eleanor. "Sometimes I think about Bradley Wells," he admitted, "about thanking him." Eleanor laughed quietly. "For being shallow and cruel. For not seeing what was right in front of him. The most remarkable woman I've ever known." Michael's voice was tender but fierce. "His loss was the greatest gift of my life." That evening, as they settled Sophia into the nursery they had prepared during Eleanor's winter visit, Martha stopped by with a small package. "I found this when I was cleaning out some old boxes," she explained, handing it to Eleanor. It was a framed photograph, yellowed with age, showing a young soldier in a Marine uniform, his face unlined, his eyes bright with youth and hope. Michael. Before Afghanistan, before the scars, before life had tested him in fire. "He was so young," Eleanor said, tracing the image with her fingertips. "Yes," Martha agreed, "but not as whole as he is now." She looked meaningfully at her son, who was gently rocking Sophia in his arms, singing softly to her in a mixture of English and the Ukrainian lullabies Eleanor had taught him. Later, Eleanor placed the photograph beside a more recent one on their Bedroom dresser, Michael as he was now, holding Sophia on the day of her birth, his scarred face alight with joy. Two versions of the same man, she murmured to herself. Both beautiful in different ways. Michael came up behind her, rapping, his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Which do you prefer?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability in his question. Eleanor turned in his arms to face him. "I love the young man who has yet to face his greatest challenges," she said honestly. "But I fell in love with the man who survived. Them, who knows what it means to be broken and to heal, who understands loss and therefore values love all the more deeply." As they stood together, their daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room, Eleanor thought about the strange, winding path that had brought her here. From mail-order bride to abandoned fiancée to beloved wife and mother. Each painful turn, each moment of despair had been a necessary step toward this imperfect but precious life. "We should renew our vows," she said suddenly. "Not just go through the motions like we did the first time, but really celebrate what we've become to each other." Michael smiled, the expression transforming his face in the way that still made her heart skip. "I like that idea. But this time, no rush, no practical considerations, just us, making promises we already know we intend to keep." "Just us," Eleanor agreed, resting her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, the sound that had become home in a way no place ever could. 5 years after Sophia's birth, the Jenkins family had settled into a rhythm that worked for their unconventional lifestyle. Their transatlantic existence had evolved into something uniquely their own, a life built on compromise, adaptation, and the unwavering foundation of their relationship. Sophia had grown into a precocious kindergartner with her father's determined green eyes and her mother's quick intelligence. At 5, she was already fluent in both English and Ukrainian, switching between languages with an ease that amazed everyone around her. "American in Virginia, Ukrainian in Kyiv," she would explain matter-of-factly to confuse strangers who heard. Her perfect accent in both languages, Eleanor's career had flourished in ways she could never have anticipated. Her unique position, splitting time between Westfield College and Kyiv University, had led to a collaborative program between the two institutions, an exchange initiative that brought Ukrainian students to Virginia and American students to Kyiv. She had published 2 books on comparative literature that had garnered international attention, and she had been invited to speak at conferences across Europe and North America. Michael, too, had found unexpected professional fulfillment. What had begun as a temporary accommodation to Eleanor's teaching schedule in Kyiv had evolved into an international veterans outreach program. Using his experience with American veterans, he had helped establish support systems for Ukrainian veterans dealing with post-traumatic stress. His work had been recognized by organizations in both countries, and he had recently been approached about expanding the program to other nations. Their vow renewal ceremony took place in Martha's Garden, the same location as their original wedding, but transformed by Sophia's enthusiastic decoration with wildflowers she had gathered herself. Unlike their first ceremony, hastily arranged to meet visa requirements, this celebration was attended by friends from both sides of the Atlantic. Eleanor's colleagues from Kyiv, Michael's fellow veterans, the community of Mapleton that had embraced them both. "The first time we stood here," Michael said during their personal vows, "we were 2 strangers making a practical arrangement. I promised to be honest, to respect your independence, and to give our beginning my best effort." Eleanor smiled at the memory, squeezing his hands as he continued. "Today, I'm not making promises to a stranger, but to the woman who has become the center of my world, the mother of our daughter, my partner in every sense. I promise to continue growing with you, to support your dreams as fiercely as you've supported mine, and to never take for granted the miracle of how we found each other. When it was Eleanor's turn, she spoke with confidence that had been hard-won, through years of finding her place in a new country, a new life. Michael, you once told me that being whole doesn't mean being unbroken. It means finding someone who sees your broken pieces and loves you anyway. You have taught me that strength comes not from never falling, but from rising each time we fall. She glanced at Sophia, who was watching with solemn attention from her place beside Martha. You have given me not just a home, but a future I never dared to imagine. I promise to continue building that future with you, day by day, challenge by challenge, joy by joy. The reception that followed was a blend of American and Ukrainian traditions, Martha's homemade pies alongside Ukrainian honey cake, country music playing alongside traditional Ukrainian folk songs. As Eleanor watched Michael twirl Sophia in an impromptu dance, she felt a completeness that transcended cultural boundaries, a happiness that had been hard-won through courage and compromise. Later that evening, after Sophia had fallen asleep in Martha's spare room where she would spend the night, Eleanor and Michael walked along the path behind the inn, the same route they had taken countless times during their early days together. I've been meaning to tell you something, Michael said, his expression unusually serious in the moonlight. I've been offered a position with the International Veterans Alliance. They want me to oversee their new global mental health initiative. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. That's incredible, Michael. You've worked so hard for this recognition. There's a catch, he continued. The position would be based in Geneva, at least for the first 2 years. Eleanor was silent, processing the implications. Geneva, Switzerland, a third country to add to their already complicated lives. I haven't given them an answer yet, Michael said quickly. I wanted to talk to you first. This is a decision we need to make together. Eleanor took his hand as they continued walking. Tell me more about the position. What would it involve? As Michael described the role, coordinating mental health resources for veterans across multiple countries, developing training programs, advocating for better policies, his passion was evident. This was an opportunity to expand the work that had given him purpose after his own trauma, to potentially help thousands of veterans around the world. It sounds perfect for you, Eleanor said sincerely. The right challenge at the right time. But what about you? Your position at Westfield and Kiev, Sophia's school? Michael's concern was palpable. Our life is complicated enough already. Eleanor considered this. Their carefully balanced existence between 2 continents had taken years to establish. Adding a third location would require rethinking everything. Maybe it's time for a change, she said slowly, surprising herself with the words. Sophia will be starting 1st grade next year. We've been talking about giving her more stability. What are you suggesting? Michael asked. Eleanor paused, gathering her thoughts. What if I took a sabbatical? 1 year, maybe 2. I could write the book I've been thinking about, the one comparing Ukrainian and American literature through the lens of national trauma. You'd put your teaching on hold. Michael sounded skeptical. You love teaching, Eleanor. I do, she acknowledged. But I also love writing. And I love our family. Sometimes priorities shift. She smiled up at him. You once rearranged your entire life to accommodate my teaching in Kiev. Maybe it's my turn to support your dream. Michael pulled her close. I'd never ask you to give up something that matters to you. You're not asking, Eleanor reminded him. I'm offering. There are universities in Geneva. There are international schools for Sophia. We could make it work. We've become experts at adapting. The decision wasn't made that night, but over the following weeks, they explored the possibilities together. Eleanor spoke with her department chairs at both institutions about taking a 2-year leave. She researched international schools in Geneva, where Sophia could continue her bilingual education. Michael gathered information about housing, visas, healthcare, all the practical details that would need to be addressed. Sophia, when they finally explained the potential move to her, had only one question. Will Babushka Martha come visit us? Of course she will, Michael assured her, exchanging a grateful look with Eleanor over their daughter's adaptable nature. Children, they were learning, often adjusted more easily than adults to life's changes. The conversation with Martha was more difficult. At 71, she had scaled back her involvement in running the inn, but she remained the heart of the Jenkins family. The thought of her son and granddaughter moving even farther away was clearly painful for her. "Switzerland," she said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "That's quite an adventure." "It would only be for 2 years," Michael reminded her. "And we'd make sure you could visit whenever you wanted." Martha patted his hand. "I know you would, dear, and I'm so proud of you, of both of you." She glanced at Eleanor. "You've built something special, something that can withstand distance and change." "We learned from the best," Eleanor said, embracing her mother-in-law. That summer, as they prepared for the possibility of their move to Geneva, an unexpected complication arose. Eleanor's former fiancé, Bradley Wells, announced his resignation as principal of Mapleton High School following allegations of inappropriate behavior with a young female teacher. The scandal rocked the small town, with opinions divided between those who believed the accusations and those who defended Bradley as a respected community member. Eleanor and Michael tried to stay above the fray, but their connection to the story was inevitable. Everyone in Mapleton remembered how Bradley had abandoned Eleanor 6 years earlier. One evening, as they were finishing dinner, a knock came at their door. Eleanor opened it to find Bradley standing on their porch, looking older and more haggard than she remembered. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, his voice lacking the confidence she had once found so appealing in his emails. I needed to talk to someone who might understand." Eleanor hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. Michael appeared in the hallway, his expression guarded but civil as he nodded to Bradley. "Sophia's upstairs reading," he said to Eleanor. "I'll go check on her while you two talk." The gesture of trust, leaving Eleanor alone with the man who had once hurt her so deeply, spoke volumes about how far they had come. In the living room, Bradley sat heavily on the edge of the sofa, staring at his hands. "I guess you've heard the rumors." "I've heard there were allegations," Eleanor said carefully. "I don't know the details." Bradley looked up, his eyes hollow. "I didn't do what they're saying, but I did. I made mistakes. I let my position go to my head. I thought I was entitled to admiration, to attention." Eleanor remained silent, letting him continue. "When I left you that day," he said, the abrupt change of subject catching her off guard, "it wasn't really about your age. That was just an excuse. The truth was, I was terrified." "Terrified of what?" "Of you," Bradley admitted. "Of how real you were. Your intellect, your independence, your expectations. In our emails, I could pretend to be the sophisticated, confident man I wanted to be. But face to face, I knew I couldn't live up to the person I had pretended to be." Eleanor absorbed this, finding that the revelation no longer had the power to hurt her. "Why are you telling me this now, Bradley?" He shrugged helplessly. "Because my life is falling apart, and I've been thinking about where it all went wrong. That day, leaving you, was the moment I chose the easy path over the right one. Everything since then has been more of the same, choosing what makes me look good over what's actually good." "I'm sorry for what you're going through," Eleanor said sincerely, "but I'm not sure what you want from me." Bradley looked up, his expression lost. "Forgiveness, maybe? Or just to tell you that you were better off without me? Whatever happened to you after I left, I hope it's been good." Eleanor smiled then, a genuine smile free of bitterness. "It has been good, Bradley. Better than I could have imagined." She glanced toward the stairs where Michael had disappeared with Sophia. "I found someone who values honesty over pretty words, who sees strength in vulnerability instead of weakness." When Bradley left, Eleanor found Michael and Sophia in the child's bedroom, building an elaborate fort out of blankets and pillows. She joined them inside the makeshift structure, listening as Sophia described the imaginary land they had created. Later, after Sophia was asleep, Eleanor recounted her conversation with Bradley to Michael. "It's strange," she concluded. "For so long, he was this villain in my story, the man who abandoned me when I was most vulnerable. But now I just feel sorry for him." "That's because you've moved on," Michael observed. "His actions no longer define any part of your life. Except that without them, I might never have met you," Eleanor pointed out. "Never have had Sophia. Never have built this life." Michael pulled her close. "Then I suppose I owe him a debt of gratitude after all." 2 months later, they stood in the Geneva International Airport, surrounded by luggage and the controlled chaos of a major travel hub. Sophia clutched her favorite stuffed animal, a unicorn with a Ukrainian flower crown that Martha had made for her, as she stared wide-eyed at the multilingual signs and diverse crowds. "Are we home now?" she asked, looking up at her parents. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Michael. "Not yet, sweetheart. We need to go to our new apartment first." "No," Sophia said with the innocent wisdom of childhood. "I mean, are we home when we're together? You said home is where our family is." Michael knelt down to her level, brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. "That's exactly right, Sophia. We're home as long as we're together." Their apartment in Geneva was smaller than their house in Virginia, but larger than their flat in Kyiv, a third space that represented their newest adventure. As they unpacked, placing familiar items in unfamiliar rooms, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. She had arrived in America 6 years ago with 2 suitcases and a broken heart, convinced that her dreams of building a life there had been shattered by one man's rejection. Now she was unpacking in Switzerland, her daughter's laughter echoing through a new home, her husband assembling furniture with patient determination, her future unfolding in ways she could never have predicted. That evening, after Sophia had finally succumbed to jet lag and fallen asleep, Eleanor and Michael stood on the small balcony of their apartment, looking out at the lights of Geneva and the dark silhouette of Mont Blanc in the distance. "Are you having second thoughts?" Michael asked, noticing her quiet contemplation. Eleanor shook her head. "No, just appreciating the journey, thinking about all the crossroads that led us here." "Any regrets?" "Not one," she said firmly. "Every difficult moment, every painful choice led us exactly where we needed to be." She leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "And I have a feeling this is just the beginning." Michael wrapped his arms around her, both of them, gazing out at the city that would be their home for the next 2 years. "That's the beauty of our story, isn't it? It began with an ending that neither of us wanted, but it's brought us to beginnings we never could have imagined." As they stood together in the cool European evening, Eleanor thought about the mail order. Bride she had been, a woman desperate enough to seek connection across continents, brave enough to start over in a foreign land. She thought about the scarred veteran who had seen beyond her circumstance to the person she truly was, who had offered a practical solution that had blossomed into profound love. Their story had never been conventional. From its painful beginning to this newest chapter, it had been shaped by courage, chance, and choices that prioritized growth over comfort. But perhaps that was why it worked. They had never expected perfection from each other, only honesty and effort. To new beginnings, Eleanor whispered, raising her face to the star-filled sky. "And to the journey," Michael added, his voice a promise in the gathering darkness, "wherever it leads us next." 3 years in Geneva transformed the Jenkins family in ways none of them had anticipated. What had begun as a 2-year assignment extended into a third when Michael's program proved so successful that the International Veterans Alliance requested he stay to oversee its expansion into Eastern Europe and parts of Africa. Eleanor, too, had found unexpected fulfillment. Her sabbatical had resulted not only in the completion of her book comparing Ukrainian and American literature, but also in a consulting position with UNESCO's Cultural Heritage Division. Her expertise in cross-cultural communication and her personal experience bridging different worlds made her uniquely qualified for projects preserving literary traditions in conflict zones. Sophia, now 8, had blossomed in the international environment of Geneva. Attending a school where children from dozens of countries learned side by side, she had added French to her already impressive linguistic repertoire and developed a passionate interest in world geography. Each night at dinner, she would announce which country she planned to visit when she grew up, peppering her parents with questions about cultures they sometimes knew little about. "Mongolia tonight," Michael whispered to Eleanor one evening as their daughter approached the table with a determined expression. "I think we're in trouble." Eleanor laughed, watching as Sophia spread a hand-drawn map beside her plate. "I've been reading about Genghis Khan," she announced, "and the nomadic traditions that continue today." As Sophia launched into her nightly educational lecture, Eleanor caught Michael's eye across the table. The fond amusement in his gaze mirrored her own, along with something deeper, a shared appreciation for the remarkable child they were raising together. Later that evening, after Sophia had gone to bed, they sat on the balcony of their Geneva apartment, enjoying the mild spring air and the distant view of the lake. "I received an email from Westfield today," Eleanor said, sipping her tea. "They're wondering about my plans for next year." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "And what did you tell them?" "Nothing yet. I wanted to talk to you first." She set her cup down. "The IVA has asked you to stay on permanently, haven't they?" Michael looked surprised. "How did you know?" "I know you," Eleanor said simply. "The way you've been lately. Contemplative, weighing options. And Director Larson cornered me at the reception last week, singing your praises and hinting about long-term plans." Michael sighed. "I was going to bring it up this weekend. They've offered me the position of Deputy Director for Program Development. It would mean staying in Geneva indefinitely. How do you feel about it?" Eleanor asked, watching his expression carefully. "Professionally? It's exactly what I've been working toward, the chance to create systems that help veterans on a global scale." He reached for her hand across the small table. "But personally, I don't want to make another decision that uproots our family unless we're all on board." Eleanor squeezed his fingers. "Remember what you told me when I was offered the position in Kyiv, that my career mattered, that my dreams mattered. I remember. Your dreams matter too, Michael." She leaned forward. "But before we decide anything, there's something else we need to consider." Michael raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "Martha, she's turning 75 next month. The last time we video called, I noticed how tired she looked. She's still managing the inn, still taking care of everyone else, but she's getting older," Michael finished quietly. "And we're halfway around the world." This was the complication of their international life that they had never fully resolved, the distance from Martha, who had been such a crucial part of their story from the beginning. While they had arranged for her to visit Geneva twice and had returned to Virginia for holidays, the separation had grown more difficult as Martha aged. "She would never ask us to change our plans for her," Eleanor said. "You know that." "Which is exactly why we need to consider it anyway," Michael agreed. She supported us through everything. She's the reason we found each other in the first place. The question of what to do next occupied their conversations for weeks. They explored all options. Michael commuting between Geneva and Virginia for part of the year, finding a position for Martha with a veterans organization in Geneva, even buying a larger apartment where she could have her own space if she moved to Switzerland. But with each scenario they discussed, the logistics became more complicated. Martha's health was good for her age, but the idea of her navigating life in a French-speaking country where she knew no one besides them seemed increasingly impractical. The solution, when it finally presented itself, came from an unexpected source. Eleanor was on a video call with Alexander Petrov, her former mentor, who had helped her secure her first teaching position at Westfield years ago. Now the Dean of International Studies at the college, he mentioned that the school had received a substantial grant to establish a Center for Global Veterans Affairs. "We're looking for someone to direct it," Alexander explained, "someone with international experience who understands both the academic and practical aspects of veterans' issues." Eleanor felt a surge of excitement. "Alexander, I may know exactly the right person." That evening she shared the opportunity with Michael. It would mean returning to Virginia, she acknowledged, leaving the IVA position. "But you'd be building something from the ground up, implementing everything you've learned here on a more focused scale." Michael was quiet, considering. "And you? What would this mean for your work with UNESCO?" "I've already checked," Eleanor said. "Most of my consulting can be done remotely, with occasional travel, and Westfield has already expressed interest in having me return to teaching, perhaps in a position that would allow me to continue my international work part-time. And Sophia, she's thrived here in Geneva." "She has," Eleanor agreed, "but she's also adaptable, and she misses her grandmother. She mentions Martha in every bedtime prayer." Michael walked to the window, looking out at the Geneva skyline that had become so familiar. "I need to think about it," he said finally. "It's a big decision." "Of course," Eleanor said, coming to stand beside him. "There's no rush." But there was a rush, as they discovered the following week when Martha called with news she had been reluctant to share. She had been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer. The prognosis was good. The cancer had been caught early, and her doctors were optimistic, but she would need surgery, followed by radiation treatments. "I don't want you to worry," Martha insisted. "Mrs. Henderson from the diner has already volunteered to drive me to appointments, and the church has organized a meal train." Michael's face was pale as they ended the call. "We need to go back," he said simply. "Not just to visit, to stay. I can't be on another continent while my mother goes through this." Eleanor nodded, already mentally organizing what needed to be done. "I'll contact Westfield tomorrow about the center position and my teaching options, and we'll need to speak with Sophia's school about transferring her records." Telling Sophia was easier than they had anticipated. While she had friends in Geneva, she would miss. The prospect of being closer to her beloved grandmother outweighed everything else in her 8-year-old priorities. "Can I help take care of Babushka?" she asked, using the Ukrainian term of endearment she had always called Martha. "I can read to her when she's tired." Eleanor hugged her daughter close. "That's exactly what she'll need. Someone to make her smile when things are hard." The international relocation they had mastered twice before proved more challenging in reverse. 3 years in Geneva had allowed them to accumulate more possessions, establish deeper connections, and create more complex lives than they had initially planned. Disentangling themselves took time and emotional energy they hadn't anticipated. Michael's colleagues at the IVA were understanding, but disappointed to lose him. They organized a farewell reception where the impact of his work was evident in the testimonials from veterans and advocates from around the world. Eleanor watched with pride as her husband was honored, remembering the scarred veteran she had met in the Mapleton Inn who had doubted his own worth. Their return to Virginia coincided with the beginning of summer. Instead of moving back into their old house, which they had rented out during their absence, they stayed temporarily with Martha at the inn while looking for a place closer to her. Sophia immediately appointed herself her grandmother's special helper, bringing tea and monitoring Martha's rest periods with a seriousness that made the adults hide their smiles. Martha's surgery was successful, and as she began the radiation treatments, the family fell into a new routine. Michael commuted to Westfield to lay the groundwork for the Center for Global Veterans Affairs, while Eleanor divided her time between remote consulting work, preparations for teaching in the fall, and supporting Martha through her recovery. One evening, as Eleanor sat on the porch of the inn editing a UNESCO report, Martha joined her, looking tired but determined after her treatment earlier that day. "You should be resting," Eleanor chided gently. Martha waved away her concern. "I've been thinking about the inn," she said, getting directly to the point as was her way. "It's time for me to step back, especially now with the health issues." Eleanor set her laptop aside. "What are you considering? Hiring a manager?" Martha shook her head. "I'm thinking of selling it." The statement took Eleanor by surprise. "The inn has been in your family for generations." "And I've loved every minute of running it," Martha acknowledged. "But things change. Priorities change." She looked at Eleanor intently. "You and Michael and Sophia, you're my priority now. And I don't want to be tied to this place if it means missing out on time with you." When Michael returned home that evening, they discussed Martha's decision. "She seems set on it," Eleanor explained. "She talked about possibly moving into a smaller place, something easier to manage." Michael was quiet, processing the idea of the inn no longer being in the family. "It's where we met," he said finally, "where everything began for us." That night, unable to sleep, Eleanor found herself wandering through the quiet inn. In the soft darkness, she could almost see herself as she had been 7 years ago. Lost, abandoned, facing an uncertain future in a foreign country. She remembered the kindness Martha had shown her, the steady support Michael had offered, the way this place had sheltered her when she had nowhere else to go. An idea began to form in her mind, wild and impractical at first, but gaining clarity as she considered it from different angles. By morning, she was ready to share it with Michael. "What if we bought the inn?" she proposed over early coffee. "Not to run it as our primary business, but to preserve it, to keep it in the family." Michael looked surprised. "Us? Run an inn?" "Not exactly," Eleanor clarified. "We'd hire a manager for day-to-day operations, but we could live here, convert part of it into our family home while maintaining the rest as a business." As they discussed the idea, its potential became clearer. The inn was large enough that the east wing could be renovated into a private residence for their family, with a separate suite for Martha that would allow her independence while keeping her close. The remaining rooms could continue operating as a small boutique hotel. It would be an investment in the community too, Eleanor pointed out, keeping the business open, providing jobs. And Sophia would have stability, the same school, close to her grandmother, Michael added, warming to the concept. "But what about our careers? The commute to Westfield isn't short." "I've already been discussing a hybrid teaching arrangement, some days on campus, some remote," Eleanor said. "And the center you're building will need administrative space, but does it need you there full-time once it's established?" The more they talked, the more the plan evolved. That afternoon, they presented the idea to Martha, who listened with growing interest. "You'd want to live here? All of you?" she asked, hoping to compete with concern in her voice. "It's a lot to take on." "It is," Michael agreed. "But this place matters to us, to all of us. It's where our story began, where Sophia's story began in a way. We want to preserve that. And we want to be close to you, Eleanor added simply. Not because you need us, but because we need you. The transformation of the Mapleton Inn took nearly a year to complete. Working with a local architect who specialized in historic renovations, they redesigned the space to accommodate both their family life and the continuation of the business Martha had built. Throughout the process, they discovered hidden aspects of the old building, original hardwood floors beneath worn carpet, decorative moldings that had been painted over, a dumbwaiter system that could be updated to modern standards. Sophia approached the project with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything, creating elaborate drawings of how she thought each room should look and offering detailed suggestions for improvements that ranged from practical to fantastical. Her bedroom, situated in what had once been a small sitting room, featured a window seat where she spent hours reading and dreaming. Martha's suite, designed with both comfort and accessibility in mind, became her haven as she completed her cancer treatments and received the good news that she was in remission. With a small kitchenette, a spacious bedroom, and a sitting room that overlooked the garden, she maintained her independence while remaining connected to the family. Michael's work with the Center for Global Veterans Affairs flourished. Building on his international experience, he created programs that not only served local veterans, but also established connections with organizations around the world. 3 days a week he commuted to Westfield. The other 2, he worked from a home office they had created in what had once been the inn's library. Eleanor's hybrid teaching arrangement proved successful, allowing her to continue her UNESCO consulting, while mentoring a new generation of students. Her book was published to critical acclaim, and she was invited to lecture at universities across the country. Each time she returned from her travels, the sight of the Mapleton Inn, now officially renamed Jenkins House, filled her with a sense of homecoming she had never experienced before her life with Michael. Exactly 1 year after Martha's recovery, they hosted a grand reopening celebration for the renovated inn. The entire town turned out for the event, curious to see the changes to the historic building that had been a Mapleton landmark for generations. As Eleanor moved through the crowded rooms, greeting neighbors and answering questions about the renovation, she spotted a familiar face near the entrance. Bradley Wells, looking older and more subdued than when she had last seen him. After his resignation from the high school, he had moved to Richmond and, according to town gossip, had been working as a private tutor. "Bradley," she said, approaching him with genuine welcome. "I'm glad you could come." He seemed surprised by her greeting. "I wasn't sure if I should," he admitted, "but I wanted to see what you've done with the place. It's impressive." "Thank you," Eleanor said. "It's been a labor of love." Bradley glanced around at the gathering, at Michael showing a group of veterans the historic photographs they had uncovered during the renovation, at Sophia demonstrating her room to friends from school, at Martha looking healthy and content as she chatted with old acquaintances. "You've built something remarkable here," he said quietly. "Not just the building, but everything." Eleanor followed his gaze, seeing her life through his eyes for a moment. The family and community she had found, the success she had achieved, the home she had created from what had once been temporary shelter in a moment of crisis. "Thank you for coming, Bradley," she said sincerely. "It means a lot." Later that evening, as the last guests departed, and Sophia was finally persuaded to go to bed after the excitement of the day, Eleanor and Michael stood on the front porch of Jenkins' house. The sign, newly painted with the building's original date of construction and its new name, swung gently in the summer breeze. "Happy?" Michael asked, his arm around her waist. Eleanor leaned against him, considering the question. "Happy doesn't seem adequate," she said finally. "Grateful, fulfilled." Still amazed sometimes by how different my life is from what I imagined when I first came to America. When you were left at the altar for being too old, Michael recalled, a hint of old anger in his voice. Eleanor laughed softly. The best rejection of my life, as it turned out. From inside came the sound of Martha calling Sophia back to bed. The child had apparently made one last escape to retrieve a forgotten stuffed animal. The domestic moment, ordinary but precious, made Eleanor's heart swell with contentment. You know, she said thoughtfully, when I joined that international matchmaking service, I was looking for security, for a place to belong. I thought I needed someone to rescue me from my circumstances. And instead, you rescued yourself, Michael finished, echoing what he had told her years ago. With a little help from a battle-scarred veteran who recognized strength when he saw it. Eleanor turned to face him, taking in the features that had become so dear to her. The scar that she now saw as a mark of survival rather than damage. The green eyes that had always looked at her with honesty. The smile that had transformed from cautious to confident as they had built their life together. We rescued each other, she corrected gently. And we're still doing it every day. As the lights of Mapleton twinkled in the distance and the old inn settled around them, Eleanor thought about the mail-order bride she had been and the woman she had become. Professor, author, wife, mother, business owner. Each role had been shaped by choices made in moments of both crisis and opportunity, by the courage to begin again when plans failed, by the willingness to create a life that didn't fit any conventional pattern. To unexpected journeys, she said, echoing the toast they had made on their wedding day. And to the road ahead, Michael added, sealing the promise with a kiss as the Virginia night wrapped around Jenkins' house. The home they had built from the ashes of abandonment and the foundation of second chances. 5 years passed at Jenkins' house, each season bringing new changes to the family that had found its permanent home in the renovated inn. Sophia entered her teenage years with the same enthusiasm and curiosity that had characterized her childhood, though now her interests had narrowed to photography, environmental science, and the Ukrainian folk dancing group Eleanor had helped establish at the local community center. At 13, Sophia was a unique blend of her parents. She had Michael's steady determination and Eleanor's quick intellect, along with a confidence entirely her own. Her multilingual upbringing and international experience had given her a perspective rare among her peers in Mapleton, something her teachers frequently commented on during parent-teacher conferences. She sees connections that other students miss, her history teacher explained. Last week, she compared Ukrainian resistance movements to Civil War underground railroads without missing a beat. Eleanor and Michael exchanged proud glances, knowing that their unconventional family journey had shaped their daughter in ways they couldn't have predicted. Martha, now 80 and cancer-free for 5 years, had gradually scaled back her involvement in the day-to-day operations of the inn portion of Jenkins' house. Instead, she focused her energy on the garden, which had become something of a local attraction with its blend of traditional Virginia plantings and Ukrainian herbs and flowers that Eleanor had introduced. "My international garden," Martha called it, proudly showing visitors the purple Ukrainian sage growing alongside Virginia sweetspire. Michael's Center for Global Veterans Affairs had evolved into a nationally recognized program, attracting grants and partnerships that allowed him to implement many of the approaches he had developed during his time with the International Veterans Alliance. Though he still traveled occasionally for conferences and training sessions, he had found a balance that kept him close to home most of the time. Eleanor's career had taken an unexpected turn when her book caught the attention of a documentary filmmaker. The resulting film, exploring the parallel experiences of trauma in Ukrainian and American literature and culture, had been featured at several festivals and had led to Eleanor becoming a sought-after speaker on cultural resilience in the face of historical trauma. Life at Jenkins' house had settled into a rhythm that accommodated both their family needs and the successful boutique hotel business they continued to operate. The manager they had hired, Tessa Williams, had proven so capable that they had eventually made her a partner in the business, allowing Eleanor and Michael to focus on their professional pursuits and family life. It was during the height of fall, foliage season, when Jenkins' house was fully booked with tourists coming to see the Virginia countryside in its autumn glory, that the letter arrived. The envelope bore Ukrainian postage stamps and was addressed to Dr. Eleanor Jenkins in handwriting that Eleanor didn't recognize. She opened it at the kitchen table while Sophia was at school and Michael was meeting with donors for the center. Inside was a letter written in Ukrainian and a faded photograph of a young couple on their wedding day. The letter was from Natalia Kovalenko, the daughter of Eleanor's mother's closest childhood friend. Eleanor vaguely remembered her mother mentioning this friend, who had remained in the small village outside Kiev, where both women had grown up, while Eleanor's mother had moved to the city to pursue her academic career. "I hope this letter finds you well," Natalia wrote. "My mother Oksana passed away last month, and while going through her belongings, I found several letters from your mother dating back many years. In the most recent one, from shortly before your parents' deaths, your mother mentioned that you were considering moving to America. After much searching, I found an article about your book and documentary that confirmed you had indeed made that journey." Eleanor paused, touched by this unexpected connection to her parents. She had maintained few ties to Ukraine outside of her professional relationships, and this link to her mother's past felt like a precious gift. The letter continued, explaining that Natalia was now the last of her family, with no children of her own. She had recently been diagnosed with a progressive illness and was trying to put her affairs in order. "Among my mother's possessions," she wrote, "I discovered that she had been safekeeping several family heirlooms belonging to your mothers. A family, items that survived the various upheavals of our country's history. I believe your mother intended for you to have them eventually, and I would like to fulfill that intention before my health makes it impossible." Enclosed with the letter was a small inventory of items. A silver samovar that had belonged to Eleanor's great-grandmother, a collection of hand-embroidered ritual cloths called rushniki that had been passed down through generations, several pieces of jewelry, and a family Bible with births, marriages, and deaths recorded back to the 1850s. "I have no one to leave these treasures to," Natalia concluded, "and they rightfully belong to your family line. If you are willing, I would like to arrange for them to be sent to you in America." When Michael returned home that evening, he found Eleanor sitting on the porch, the letter still in her hands. "What's that?" he asked, noticing her pensive expression. Eleanor explained about Natalia and the unexpected connection to her family's past. "It's strange," she said. "I've built this whole new life here, and suddenly there's this reminder of where I came from, of the generations that came before me." Michael sat beside her on the porch swing. "Will you accept the heirlooms?" "I think I should," Eleanor said slowly. "But I've been sitting here wondering if I should do more than that. Natalia is ill, alone. She's the last connection to my mother's childhood, to a part of my heritage I know very little about." "What are you thinking?" Michael asked, though the thoughtful look in his eyes suggested he already knew. "I'm thinking I should go to Ukraine, meet her in person, hear the stories she might have about my mother as a girl, about my family's history." Eleanor looked at him uncertainty. "Am I being sentimental? We have so much going on here." Michael took her hand. "Eleanor, after all these years, I still sometimes find you at the window, looking east toward Ukraine. It's part of who you are, even if your life is here now." She smiled, grateful for his understanding. "Would you and Sophia come with me?" "Try to stop us," Michael replied with a grin. "Sophia has been campaigning for an international trip since her last school break, and I haven't been back to Kiev since. We left Geneva." The planning moved quickly after that. Eleanor responded to Natalia, who was delighted at the prospect of meeting in person. They arranged to travel during Sophia's winter break, scheduling their visit to include both Christmas celebrations in Ukraine and their return for the New Year in Virginia. Sophia was ecstatic at the news. "Can I bring my camera? I want to document everything for my geography project." "Of course," Eleanor assured her, "and I'm counting on you to help with translations if my Ukrainian gets rusty." Martha insisted she was perfectly capable of staying on her own during their absence. "Tessa will be running the inn, and half the town checks on me daily anyway," she pointed out. "Besides, someone needs to water the plants." Nevertheless, they arranged for several friends to take turns staying at Jenkins' house, ensuring Martha wasn't alone for the 2 weeks they would be gone. As their departure date approached, Eleanor found herself increasingly reflective about the journey she had taken since leaving Ukraine 7 years earlier. The scared, heartbroken woman who had been abandoned at the altar seemed like a different person entirely from the confident professor and author she had become. "What are you thinking about?" Michael asked one night as they packed. Eleanor folded a sweater carefully into her suitcase. "About the last time I left Ukraine. I sold everything, said goodbye, thinking I would never return. I was so certain my future was in America with Bradley." Michael sat on the edge of the bed. "Do you ever wonder how different things would have been if he hadn't left you that day?" "Sometimes," Eleanor admitted, "but not in a way that makes me wish it had turned out differently." She reached for his hand. "That rejection led me to you, to Sophia, to this life that's more fulfilling than anything I could have imagined then." The flight to Ukraine was long, but uneventful. Sophia, despite having traveled extensively as a young child, viewed this journey with new teenage eyes, documenting everything from the airplane meal to the changing landscape visible from the window. They'd arrived in Kiev to find the city dusted with fresh snow, the golden domes of the churches gleaming in the winter sunlight. They checked into a hotel in the center of the city, planning to spend 2 days there before traveling to the village where Natalia lived. For Michael, it was a return to a place he had come to appreciate during their years of splitting time between Virginia and Ukraine. For Sophia, who retained only fragmentary memories of her early visits, it was an exciting rediscovery of her mother's homeland. "It smells different," she observed as they walked through the historic district. "Like wood, smoke and something sweet." "Probably the chestnuts roasting," Eleanor explained, pointing to a street vendor. "Your grandmother, my mother, used to buy them for me when I was a girl." They spent the day retracing steps from Eleanor's past, the university where she had taught, the apartment building where she had lived before coming to America, the coffee shop where she had graded papers on Sunday afternoons. "It feels both familiar and strange," she told Michael, as they watched Sophia photograph the architectural details of a historic building. "Like stepping into a previous life." The following day, they rented a car and drove to the small village where Natalia lived. The countryside was blanketed in snow, the traditional wooden houses appearing like illustrations from a fairy tale with their ornate window frames and steep, snow-laden roofs. Natalia's home was at the edge of the village, a modest wooden house, with blue-painted shutters and a carved wooden gate. Despite her illness, she greeted them at the door with the traditional Ukrainian welcome of bread and salt. "Eleanor," she said in Ukrainian, embracing her as if they were long-lost relatives rather than strangers. "You look so much like your mother." Inside, Natalia had prepared a traditional Ukrainian meal, borscht, vareniki with potato filling, and a holiday kutia made with wheat berries, poppy seeds, and honey. As they ate, she shared stories of Eleanor's mother as a young girl, pulling out faded photographs that showed a carefree child so different from the serious academic Eleanor. "Had known, your mother was the brightest girl in the village," Natalia said. "Everyone knew she would go far. My mother said she read every book she could find, even walking 5 kilometers to the next village to borrow from their library." After the meal, Natalia brought out the heirlooms she had mentioned in her letter. The silver samovar was tarnished, but elegant, its handles shaped like swan necks. The rushniki, ceremonial embroidered cloths, were works of art, each stitch telling a story of Ukrainian traditions and symbols. "This one," Natalia explained, holding up a particularly beautiful cloth with red and black embroidery, "was your great-grandmother's wedding rushniki. It should have been used at your wedding." Eleanor touched the intricate stitches, thinking of her hasty legal ceremony with Michael all those years ago, and their more meaningful vow renewal later. "Perhaps it will be used at Sophia's wedding someday," she said, glancing at her daughter, who was examining the cloth with interest. The family Bible was perhaps the most poignant item. Opening it carefully, Eleanor found names and dates recorded in faded ink, births, marriages, deaths going back generations. Her own birth was there, recorded in her father's neat handwriting. "Your family has deep roots," Natalia told her, "even if the branches have now extended to America." They spent 3 days with Natalia, longer than they had initially planned. Despite her illness, she was a vibrant storyteller, filling in gaps in Eleanor's knowledge of her family history and sharing traditions that had been lost in her own urban academic upbringing. Sophia absorbed everything with the enthusiasm of someone discovering a vital part of her identity. She learned to make traditional Ukrainian bread from Natalia, practiced folk dances in the small living room, and recorded hours of conversation with the older woman, preserving stories for future generations. On their last evening, as Michael helped Natalia's neighbor clear snow from the path, and Sophia organized her extensive photo collection, Eleanor sat with Natalia by the ceramic tile stove that heated the small house. "I have something else for you," Natalia said, reaching for a small wooden box on the shelf, "something personal from your mother." Inside the box was a silver ring set with a small amber stone. "Your mother left this with my mother for safekeeping during the political upheavals in the 1990s, when many people were hiding valuables. She never reclaimed it, perhaps forgetting in the chaos of those years. It belonged to your grandmother, who received it from her mother." Eleanor slipped the ring onto her finger, surprised to find it fit perfectly. "I never knew this existed." "Now you do," Natalia said simply. "And someday you will pass it to your daughter, who will pass it to hers. This is how we maintain our connections across time and distance." When it was time to leave, the farewells were emotional. Natalia's health made it unlikely they would meet again, a reality none of them mentioned, but all understood. "You have built a beautiful life," Natalia told Eleanor as they embraced one last time. "Your mother would be proud of the woman you have become, of the family you have created." Eleanor blinked back tears. "Thank you for keeping these connections alive, for giving me back a piece of my history." On the drive back to Kiev, Sophia was unusually quiet, looking out at the snow-covered landscape with a pensive expression. "What are you thinking about?" Eleanor asked, turning from the front passenger seat to look at her daughter. "About belonging," Sophia replied thoughtfully. "About how we're connected to places and people across time." She met her mother's eyes. "I'm American, but I'm also Ukrainian. I'm part of Jenkins' house, but also part of this place." Michael caught Eleanor's eye, a silent acknowledgement of the depth of their daughter's understanding. "That's exactly right," Eleanor said. "We carry all these parts of our heritage with us, no matter where we live." They spent Christmas Eve in Kyiv, attending a service at St. Sophia's Cathedral, where the ancient liturgy and haunting Ukrainian carols created a profound sense of connection to centuries of tradition. The following day, they boarded their flight back to the United States, carefully packing the family heirlooms in their luggage. Arriving at Jenkins' house on December 27th, they found Martha and several friends preparing a belated Christmas celebration. The Virginia home, decorated with pine boughs and twinkling lights, provided a striking contrast to the Ukrainian Christmas they had just experienced. That evening, after the celebrations had wound down and Sophia had finally gone to bed, exhausted from travel and excitement, Eleanor and Michael sat in front of the fireplace in what had once been the inn's main sitting room. "I have something for you," Eleanor said, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out a small package wrapped in a scrap of one of the rushniki from Natalia. Michael unwrapped it carefully to find a traditional Ukrainian carved wooden box. Inside was a man's wedding band, simple but elegant, made of silver with a narrow band of gold running through the center. "It was my father's," Eleanor explained. "Natalia had it with the other family items. I thought—" She hesitated. "We've been married for years, but you've never had a proper wedding ring." Michael slipped the ring onto his finger, visibly moved by the gesture. "It fits," he said with wonder. "Natalia said it would," Eleanor smiled. "She said some things are meant to be across time and distance." Looking around the room that had once welcomed Eleanor as a stranger in a foreign land, now transformed into the heart of their family home, Michael took her hand, the new old rings they both wore catching. "The firelight. From the mail-order bride left at the altar to this," he said softly. "Who could have predicted where that painful beginning would lead?" Eleanor leaned against him, content in a way she had never imagined possible when she had first arrived. In Mapleton. "Sometimes the most beautiful journeys start with the wrong turn," she said. "Sometimes being rejected is actually being redirected to where you truly belong." As the Virginia winter night deepened outside Jenkins' house, the family slept peacefully under its roof, Eleanor and Michael in the master suite that had once been separate guest rooms, Sophia in her beloved window-seat bedroom, Martha in her private apartment at the back of the house. 4 lives that had come together through chance, choice, and courage, creating a home that transcended geography, blending cultures and traditions into something uniquely their own. And on the mantelpiece, placed carefully among the Christmas decorations, stood a framed photograph of a young Ukrainian woman from a small village who had dared to start over in a new country, next to a picture of a battle-scarred veteran who had found the courage to open his heart again. 2 beginnings that had seemed like endings, converging to create a story neither could have written alone. 20 years had passed since Eleanor first arrived in Mapleton with 2 suitcases and a broken heart. The small Virginia town had changed in that time. New businesses lined the main street, young families had moved in, bringing fresh energy to the community. But Jenkins' house remained a constant, its Victorian architecture and welcoming porch, a landmark that had witnessed the unfolding of an extraordinary family story. On a perfect June afternoon, the gardens behind Jenkins' house were transformed with white chairs arranged in neat rows, an arbor covered in climbing roses and strings of lights waiting for evening to fall. Sophia Jenkins, now 25, stood in what had once been Martha's apartment, now converted into a bridal suite for the occasion. "Hold still," Eleanor said, carefully placing the ceremonial Ukrainian vinok, a flower crown interwoven with ribbons, on her daughter's dark hair. The traditional headpiece complemented Sophia's otherwise modern wedding dress, a symbol of the heritage she had embraced as she grew into adulthood. "Perfect," Martha declared from her seat by the window. At 92, she moved more slowly now, but her mind remained sharp, and her hands steady enough to have embroidered the rushnik that would be used in today's ceremony. the same traditional cloth that should have been part of Eleanor's wedding all those years ago. Sophia studied her. Reflection, the flower crown adding a regal touch to her appearance. "I wish Natalia could have seen this," she said softly. Natalia had passed away 5 years earlier, but not before Sophia had visited her twice more, strengthening the connection to her Ukrainian roots and documenting the older woman's stories as part of her college anthropology project. "She would have been so proud," Eleanor agreed, touching the amber ring she still wore, now alongside her wedding band. "But in a way, she is here." She gestured to the embroidered cloth, the flower crown, the traditions they had incorporated into what would otherwise be a typical American wedding. A knock at the door announced Michael's arrival. He entered, momentarily stunned at the sight of his daughter in her bridal finery. "Sophia," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. "You look beautiful." Sophia smiled, the expression transforming her face in a way that always reminded Eleanor of Michael. "Don't cry, Dad. You'll ruin the photos." Michael laughed, blinking rapidly. "No promises." He looked at Eleanor, who was adjusting the sash on Sophia's dress. "They're ready when you are." The ceremony blended elements from both cultures. Sophia and her fiancé, David, a fellow photographer she had met while documenting veteran rehabilitation programs for Michael's center, stood on the traditional rushnik while exchanging vows beneath the rose-covered arbor. They incorporated the American tradition of vows and ring exchange, followed by the Ukrainian crowning ceremony, where Eleanor and Michael placed ceremonial crowns on the couple's heads, symbolizing their new status as king and queen of their own family. As mother of the bride, Eleanor found herself watching not just her daughter, but also her husband throughout the ceremony. Michael stood tall beside her, his battle scar long since faded to a silvery line that caught the sunlight. The years had added streaks of grey to his hair and lines of experience around his eyes, but they had also brought a depth of joy she couldn't have imagined when they first met. The reception carried on into the evening, with guests dining at tables set up across the extensive gardens of Jenkins' house. String lights illuminated the space as darkness fell, creating a magical atmosphere for the multicultural celebration that included Ukrainian folk dances alongside contemporary American music. During a quiet moment, as Sophia and David shared a dance with Martha, watching proudly from her seat of honor, Eleanor and Michael slipped away to the front porch of Jenkins' house, the same porch where they had sat countless times throughout their marriage, weathering challenges and celebrating triumphs. 20 years, Michael said, taking Eleanor's hand. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you arrived in Mapleton." Eleanor smiled, remembering that desperate day when she thought her life was over, not realizing it was just beginning. "And sometimes it feels like I've always been here, like this has always been home." "Do you ever regret it?" Michael asked. "Any of it? The mail-order bride service coming to America?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "Not even for a moment," she said finally. "Every step, even the painful ones, led exactly where I needed to go." She squeezed his hand. "Where we both needed to go." From the garden came the sound of laughter as Sophia's friends began an impromptu dance contest. Through the open windows of Jenkins' house, they could see Martha holding court among the older guests, no doubt sharing stories of the bride as a child. "We've built something remarkable here," Michael observed. "Not just the house or the business, but this family, this life." "From the most unlikely beginning," Eleanor agreed. "A mail-order bride left at the altar for being too old, and a battle-scarred veteran who offered marriage as a practical solution to a visa problem." Michael laughed. "When you put it that way, it sounds like we had no chance at all." "And yet, here we are." Eleanor gestured toward the celebration in their garden, the tangible evidence of the life they had created together. As the evening progressed, Sophia sought them out, her new husband beside her. "We're thinking of announcing our news," she said. exchanging a meaningful look with David. "Are you sure you want to share it today?" Eleanor asked, understanding immediately what news her daughter was referring to. Sophia had confided in her weeks earlier about the pregnancy they had recently confirmed. Sophia nodded. "It feels right. This day is about family, past, present, and future." She placed a hand unconsciously on her still flat stomach. "And this little one is part of that story." When Sophia clinked her glass and made the announcement, the garden erupted in cheers and congratulations. Martha wiped tears of joy, and Michael embraced his daughter with careful tenderness, as if she had suddenly become more fragile with the news. Later, as the celebration continued, Sophia found a moment alone with Eleanor near the old oak tree that had stood sentinel over Jenkins' house for generations. "Mom," she said, her expression serious despite the festivity around them, "I've been thinking about something. David and I want to name the baby after Martha if it's a girl." Eleanor smiled. "She would be so honored." "And if it's a boy," Sophia continued, "we want to use a Ukrainian name to honor where we came from, the journey that led us here." Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes at this unexpected gift. The knowledge that the connections she had preserved would continue into another generation, that the blend of cultures and traditions would live on in her grandchild. "Sophia," she said, taking her daughter's hands, "the day I came to America, I thought I was leaving everything behind, my home, my culture, my past. I never imagined I'd find a way to bring it all forward into a new life, or that someday my American grandchild might carry that heritage in their name." As the night deepened and guests began to depart, Eleanor found herself standing with Michael and Martha, watching Sophia and David thanking their friends and family. The 3 generations of the Jenkins family, Martha, who had opened her heart and home to a stranger, Eleanor, who had found the courage to begin again, and Sophia, who carried the blend of both worlds into the future, stood together beneath the Virginia sky. "Who would have thought," Martha said softly, "that opening the inn door to a heartbroken mail-order bride would lead to all this?" "Life's greatest stories aren't found in perfect beginnings," Michael quoted, recalling the words Bradley had once written to Eleanor in their email correspondence, "but in the beautiful complications that follow." Eleanor slipped her arm through her husband's, feeling the warmth of his presence beside her. "And sometimes," she added, watching her daughter's radiant smile as she bid farewell to her wedding guests, "the most painful rejections lead us exactly where we're meant to be." As the last guests departed and Sophia and David prepared to leave for their honeymoon, Eleanor stood on the porch of Jenkins' house, no longer the desperate stranger seeking shelter, but the woman who had transformed rejection into resilience, abandonment into belonging, and a practical arrangement into a love story that would continue through generations yet to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.